Hi, I'm Jane Schatz. Today we're going to have a nice lesson on glazing. Before I start mixing up a glaze, I want to show you my glazing equipment. Very simple. First, I have a digital scale. I did not spend hundreds of dollars on a ceramic digital scale. I went to a bakery catalog and I just bought a scale for $59. This is the best investment I ever made in my studio. I let go of those gram scales. I don't even know if some of you know what the gram scales, triple beam gram scales are, but I let go of them and I'm now using this. It's fabulous. It goes between pounds and grams. In most glaze recipes, everything is in grams, so it's very, very nice. Also, what it does, which is great, is it starts off at 0 with your weight. Like, I'll have a plastic container on, and when I turn it on, now it starts at 0. And then it includes the weight of the plastic at 0, and then I can start weighing out my chemicals. Another thing that you need to have in a studio when you're mixing up glazes is a respirator. I talk about safety in the studio all the time on all of my videos. It's incredibly important. However, I realize that some of the equipment is a little bit overwhelming, but to have really good safety measures in your studio, like washing everything continually, is the most important thing to do. Never sweep, never brush anything in your studio. Don't sweep the floors ever. You sponge them down with a sponge mop, and you wash your tables, you wash everything with sponges. If you do that, you are taking away most of the microscopic particles of silica that could be in the air. What I'm going to show you are 2 respirators that I use. I used to use this a lot more than I do, but I don't anymore because of some other nicer respirators that have come by. But if people are really concerned, you use one of these, and I'm going to put this on, and it looks very funny. And you tie it up and everything, and it unscrews, and you put in a fresh filter each time you use it. Each time if you're doing a major glaze making, or you're you're cleaning up your studio, or you have a dirty place and you want to really clean it, I would use this. Because I keep my studio so clean, and it's a daily thing I do, I have stopped using that. I found this other respirator. You can go online and you can find them. They have this little mini filter attached to the very comfortable little filter that you can just put on and off, and it's very easy. I use this all the time. Whenever I'm mixing up 1 glaze or 4 glazes for the day, I use this. But I'm going to be giving you a demonstration today, so I obviously cannot use this. So I'm going to be mixing glazes without any respirator on. But just make sure you understand that I always use a respirator when I do this. I'm also going to show you how to minimize the dust when you're mixing up your glazes. Meaning you just don't throw your glazes in. You put them in very slowly, so you'll see very, very little smoke rising or dust rising from the bucket. And that is your indication that you're doing a good job. All right, I'm going to mix up that choy green glaze, and I've written down my chemicals and how many grams I'm going to use. My largest component to the recipe is methylene cyanide, so I'm going to use that one first. I'm going to make up a 4,113 gram batch of glaze. So my first chemical is going to be 2,217 grams. The digital scale is so wonderful because it gets you right on the 1/10 of a gram. It's just wonderful. It makes this go very, very quickly. Okay, so what I have to do is I have to do it in sections. So I usually, if I have a large recipe over 2,000, I might do 500 and 500. But I'm going to do, because I know that methylene cyanide is a little heavy as compared to, let's say, EPK, which is very light. I'm going to do about 800 grams at a time. I'll start off with that. I work with a nice big scoop. You can get stainless steel ones or plastic ones. And here is my glaze bucket. I'm mixing glaze into an existing glaze bucket. I have about this much of glaze, and I want to bring it up to about here. So that's what we're doing today. Sometimes I'll start with a very fresh glaze batch, meaning I'll have all the way down. But with this glaze, it works beautiful to keep moving it ahead, so I'm going to do that. So I'm going to first do 800 grams. I have my chemical over here. Now, this is what I'm talking about, going very carefully and not getting dusty. Using a very big scoop will help you. Move it in here. Now notice I'm working like a robot. I'm working very, very slowly. And I'll do that again. And I'm almost at 800. You know what? I'm going to go to 1,000 because I can. So I'm almost there. Take out a little bit. You want to be exact, so watch me as I take out whatever I need to make this go to an even 1,000. I could have been using another little scoop, but my hands work just fine. I'm going to leave this down because I'm going to be using it. Now, putting it from here to here. You don't want dust. Now remember, I'm using that respirator, but today I'm not. So even though I use a respirator, I do the same thing. I put this in incredibly slowly. Now, if you're in a studio, like in a college or a public school, they are usually required to have very, very high exhaust systems, very good quality. They cost a fortune. A studio potter cannot handle that. So you really have to make sure you're in a room. If you have your doors or windows open, that's good. Wearing your respirator, but also knowing how to do this measuring instead of dumping it and having dust go all over. Okay, I had 1,000. So now I'm going to do 1,217. Working with this scale, it makes it so easy to do a large quantity of glaze chemical. It goes by very quickly. So I'm going to get in. Now you can see I am not creating dust here. I'm being very careful. Sometimes I'll goof and there will be dust, but I try very hard to keep this clean. Okay, we're at 1,280. I got to bring it down to 217. That was very easy. Now here we go again, being very careful to just put it in slowly. Now because this is such a great quantity, I'm going to give this a little mix with the water that I have in here to see how I'm coming along. I'm going to use a whisk. You can use your hand, but I'm going to give this a little bit of a stir in here to get my first large amount of chemical stirred up. I had poured in some extra water into the bucket before I started putting in the glaze chemical. You always put dry chemical into wet, all right? Not wet, not the other way around. Dry into wet. So start off with your water. All right. Now, how much water do you put in? Well, you can do this many ways. You could measure out exactly how much chemical to how much water, gives you the exact amount of consistency that you like. I have never been that kind of potter. It would drive me wild. So what I do is I always have a glaze mixing day. Like I'll mix up my glazes today. I'll add the water as I feel I need it, and I can gauge, and I'll show you when we mix it up, by the consistency of the glaze, how thick or thin it is. We talk about glaze and engobes. Engobes are liquid clay for decoration. We talk about them in terms of milk products. So do you want your glaze to be like heavy cream, or do you want it to be like half and half, or like milk, or whole milk, or like skim milk? We have that variety, and if you think about it, you can imagine what that looks like. Because I like to do this glaze overlapping, I like to start off thick and then add my layers like I showed you at the beginning of the presentation. So I'm going to make this like whole milk. My ketchup glaze, which I'm not going to be mixing up today, but my ketchup glaze, I like it thicker. So I like my ketchup glaze to feel like half and half. Not quite cream and not milk. It's thicker than milk, but it's not as thick as cream. The glossy black, that's going to go over the ketchup glaze or under my matte blue glaze, I like that to be plain milk. It has to be thin enough to work with other glazes all the time. I rarely use just plain glossy black, whereas I will use my matte black by itself, especially for sculpture. And I like that to be more like cream. I like that one nice and thick. So how do you know how you like your glazes? Well, you've got to do tests. Make a bunch of tiles. When you make up a glaze, you make a bunch of tiles and you glaze them in all different thicknesses. You can always dig your fingernail into the glaze to see how thick it goes in, and you know how thick that layer is, and you can kind of gauge that. Document everything. The glaze notebook that I showed you also has a page where I have glaze notes. And you write down all your notes of what you like. Sometimes you might even, I draw a picture of the pot that I'm glazing to see how I glaze, and then when I look back, when I empty it out of the kiln, I can say, oh, I like this effect that happened right here. What did I do? And then I go to my book and I see what I did. When I teach glazing, I make sure that people do that all the time. Especially when you're working with a new glaze. When I work with a new glaze, I do that. How do I know what a new glaze is going to do? And every once in a while, I want to work with something new, or a new combination of glazes that I haven't used that combination. So there's a lot of experimentation. Make small bowls, make tiles, label them on the back, number 1, 2, 3, 4, and then write that on a corresponding piece of paper so you'll have that identity. You're not going to remember your glaze between here and loading the kiln, let alone when it comes out of the glaze kiln. So make sure you write everything down, and you'll be very happy that you'll be able to duplicate your results that you liked. So I've added water, a little bit of water to this, and now I'm going to go on to my second chemical. My next glaze chemical is whiting, and I only need 480 grams. So I'm going to put this in and measure this out. My next ingredient is zinc oxide, and I'm going to need 423 grams of that. Zinc is a very interesting chemical when used in a glaze. You have to be a little careful of it. And a lot of my glazes have zinc in them because I love the effects. Zinc is very nice for matte glazes, and choy green starts off as a matte glaze. The beautiful thing that happens with zinc is it helps formulate tiny little crystals inside the glaze. You can't really see it as a crystal glaze, but it's what makes a matte, tiny little crystals in there. And it's beautiful. The problem that we have with zinc, let me just count to 423, is that it'll settle the glaze out a lot. So I need to put something in there to keep the glaze from settling down too much, and I use Epsom salt, which I will mix up and show you at the end of mixing up this glaze. So I wanted to do a zinc glaze for you for that reason. Okay, my next ingredient is flint, and I only need 63 grams of that. So I'll measure that in. And put that in. Give a little stir with your whisk. Get some of these chemicals mixed up. It's pretty thick in here. So I'm going to add some water right now. Just a little bit. I'm feeling it as I go along. Okay. Okay, we're getting to the end of this recipe finally. The last thing I have for my main clay base is 195 grams of lithium carbonate. And because it's only 195 grams, I work with smaller scoops, smaller containers. This is, the smaller the scoop, the smaller the containers. You can bet that it's a more expensive chemical. Now my last chemical that I'm going to add is the colorant, which is copper carbonate. And for this 4,113 gram recipe, I needed 2% copper carbonate. So when I calculated that out, that came to 82 grams. And again, small container, small scoop, expensive ingredient. Pretty color, isn't it? Okay, and that's it. Now we're going to put this in very slowly. Don't get sloppy just because you're at the end of the weighing. And now we're going to mix up, and I'm going to sieve the glaze, and I'm going to talk to you about that and show you how to sieve a glaze. Okay, now we're going to go to the next step, which is sieving the glaze. I have the glaze that I mixed up in this dirty old bucket, and I have a fresh, very clean bucket. And here is my sieve. This is an 80 mesh. When you buy sieves, they come in different meshes, and 80 mesh is very good for making a nice, pure, silky glaze. Sometimes you might want a more coarse sieve for other things that you have in your studio, but an 80 mesh is usually very good for sieving your glazes. Now, I do this by hand. However, if I had a lot of glazes to mix up all the time, I would probably use one of those new glaze mixers, glaze sievers, that you plug it in and it does all the sieving for you. It's a great tool, especially in a studio situation, a classroom situation, in college or in public schools. However, I've just not bought that piece of equipment, which is strange because I love new equipment, but I just have not gotten to use it. This I go pretty quickly, and I usually mix up about 3 glazes at a time, not more than that at a time. I have about 6 to 8 glazes that I use regularly, and some of them I use more than others. The choy green and my ketchup and black I use a lot, so those glazes I mix up pretty frequently. So here I am. I'm going to be pouring my glaze from the first bucket into the second bucket, and it's going down nicely. When I had mixed up the glaze, you saw me several times use the whisk. That helps. That gets a lot of this broken down so that by the time I get to sieving, a lot of the big clumps have been broken down already. It's getting a little bit thicker as I get to the bottom of the bucket. Now, with your hands, all I'm doing, and you can hear it, is I am just using my hands to get the glaze to go down into the new bucket. I like to sieve twice. I'm very particular that my glazes are beautifully handled. And then I'm also going to show you, I use a jiffy mixer with my drill to keep it in suspension. Oh, I just remembered, I forgot to do the Epsom salts. And this is very important, so I'm going to sieve this through on the first sieving, but as I put it into the, bring it back, I'll have the Epsom salts included. Okay, for zinc glazes, I like to put a little Epsom salts in. So I have about a cup of water, and I only need about a tablespoon of Epsom salts for this. So I'm going to, let me see, I have it in this scoop. Just put about a tablespoon in of Epsom salts in this water. Mix it up, it'll dissolve very quickly. I'll just sit for a minute, and then I will put it into my glaze bucket. I have finished sieving the glaze into my new clean glaze bucket. Now I'm going to take the sieve, I cleaned out the sieve a little bit, put it back over the original glaze bucket, and do the process all over again. But this time, I'm going to add in a little bit of Epsom salts, and it will keep my glaze from turning into a brick in the bottom of the bucket. Go through and do exactly what I did the first time. Bring the glaze into the original bucket, and sieve it through.